Okay, so in the last two videos we've looked at how to go about making sure we've got enough information in our planning part and how we go about recording and giving enough information about what we've found out. In other words, our data, what we do with our data and how we record things. So let's look at the last bit, which is about the conclusion and reflection. Alright, let's look at what we've got here. Your conclusion should always start off by telling me what you found out and use details. Don't be frightened to use data from your information. So if you've collected all this information and data about what's going on, use it to tell me about what's going on in your conclusion. You should then tell me a little bit about whether you think it conforms with what you've said in your hypothesis or what you thought might happen in terms of your research question. Now you should also try to explain things that you found out in terms of the science, the relevant science that goes with it. So I should be reading some science here. Now this is sort of looking like about half a page, isn't it? You can have in front of your conclusion an analysis question, a section, and the analysis section would go through and maybe include some of this. But I should be able to find all these references in that area. So it's you telling me what you found out and what you think it means and why you think it happened. Alright, so use the science. If you can't think of the science, this is why the research part at the start is so important. If you get that right, it should relate to what you're going to tell me in your conclusion. Right, after your conclusion, we ask you to put in reflections, and your reflections should do certain things and should not do certain things. Alright, your reflection is about what you did and how you had troubles with it and how you sorted those sort of things out. So you might have found that your independent variable was not really set up the way you wanted it to be. You might have found out that maybe you should have used a slightly different method. So here I've sort of talked about what we can do it, or here I've given you some ideas. Now it should be the same method. In your reflection, don't start off by telling me you're going to change your independent variables and dependent variable. No. Let's look at what you have or what you did. It's what we're interested in. And let's see what we could do to fix it up. So keep the same idea of independent dependent variables and then think about how you could have made it better. So maybe you chose the wrong way to measure things. Maybe there were ways to do it. Maybe you chose the wrong units. Maybe you chose cm cubes instead of litres. Think about the scale and think about what you use to make your measurements. Think about the independent independent variable increments. You might have said, I'm going to make measurements every 2 cm cubed of whatever, volume of gas or whatever. Alright? Is that the right increments? Would I have been better with 5 or maybe 10? Or would I have been better with 1 in differences? Or I could make sure I measured further. Instead of stopping at the value you stopped at, you might extend that a bit further to see if the pattern keeps going. So these sort of things we could put in our reflections. Now don't forget to tell me what you think this would do to your data that you've got. Would it make it more reliable? Would it make it more precise? Now remember, precision is about how close they are together. Would it affect the errors? It might. More about errors, I think your teachers in 11, 12 and 13 will be really concentrating on what errors are, and more about that later. Alright, so that's what we could do for our reflections. Here's what not to do. So many people try to tell me how they worked really, really hard on their lab report and they did all this stuff, but they didn't have enough time. Or they had to rush to do things. Or maybe my partner didn't do enough work. That's not what we want to hear. Your reflection is about your method, not about how you worked. So these sort of things get you nothing. They're a waste of time including, so do not include them. Now then you also should tell me how you could learn more about what you're doing. So you could do things like increase the range of my independent variables, change my independent variable. In some cases you can even change your dependent variable. And then you could look at similar things that are going on, similar aspects of about the same concept or about the same idea. Alright, so it's not too hard, but we do ask you to do that. And you might say to me, all right, now I'm just not going to do this and da-da-da-da-da. And you sort of tell me a little bit, fill it in a bit. Alright? And if you're doing these sort of things, then there's no reason why we shouldn't be getting up in the top band. If you're doing them well anyway.